inspection review checklist. We reviewed this in detail last meeting, or it was 2 meetings ago. I was here, and this has all of the suggestions for edits that you all made. So it really is just hopefully getting your approval for it, or if there's other changes you saw, I can just kind of review. Move 5.9 to the back of the packet as was requested because one of the 5.9 provisions is that it follows the rest of the ordinance. Here we go. 5.9 up a second. It will be in the back. That's that off. No, probably. Other changes are in each section that the finding of facts area with the vote for finding of facts or the conclusion of the following notes. And also under each item box, there is the finding of facts, the adapt application document, and in the record that can just be checked. And the note section, you just make a quick note of what the title of that document is. And then the other request was in 8.1 to break out, kind of a checkbox into its area for the subsections of compatibility. So there's one physical size, visual impact, proximity to other structures, and density of development. That covers it. 5.9 back in the options.
I'm sorry to interrupt. We need to update the signatures, board member signatures.
Yeah,
Just throw them out.
Eric was even with them. That's why.
And just to clarify for my slow brain. If we approve using this, we will just use this and we won't do a so-called short form.
Yeah, this would be,
This would be it, as long as it's easy enough for the chair to fill out.
Yep.
The only difference between this and the short form really is that there's no text finding of fact box underneath each section. It's all kind of just condensed into.
Right.
it should be 1 for me. I mean, I don't know any else.
And you can still just check the application.
Yeah, I don't see why it's 2 separate things.
Can I ask you a question, Matt? On the amended section. When we get an amended application, can you tell me like number 3, everybody says they're like out of sequence. You know what I mean, when you're reviewing this? Like an amended conditional use application, like the last one is when justified, I'm stating the findings of facts and reasons. I know in the past, board has been like. It seems like those should be like changed. And I honestly don't even know why that's even in there.
Waiting for amendment, still have a finding of fact.
Based on. The sections 6A, B, and C.
Redundant.
Yeah,
Yeah, oh, yeah, I can take it as.
it's weird. I've always like watching it finish when that would come up.
Those numbers are specifically put in the ordinance.
Yeah, then,
Eventually, like it's not.
Well, it's confusing,
Yeah.
you know. Luckily, we don't have a lot of amendments, but. If we do, we struggle.
About the site overview is fills that the left top little strip out. Then the board is that
Well, it's based on, so Chair will fill that out, but all this information would look to be in the application, so that I'm guessing that it's the applicant will.
Yeah, just fill that form.
Yeah, this start, we kind of, then the conditional use application, page 3 on the top, and I,
That's what I was wondering, 'cause I don't think,
the board's never done that.
yeah,
And why do we have the 5.6 amendment at the beginning of this document as opposed to later on? Because you basically have to show that it complies with 6A, 6B, 6C, which are later on in the document.
It's similar to why 5.9 was up there first, just numerical order was always had it done originally.
And what I'm looking for, and I'm gonna have the same question about the nonconformity, I'm looking for logical sequence regardless of what the number is, in terms of what we have to do. Regardless of how it's laid out in the ordinance.
So 5.6 is what you see. Typically, it's a separate application. You've always done a separate checklist, but it's always things broken up before. Right, 1 had the lines, finding the facts and concluding law, 2 had a finding the facts and concluding law, 3 didn't.
Right, but I think if we end up with an amendment, we're not gonna be able to complete that first section until we've gone through subsequent sections, like that it's met, for example. Section 6A, B, and C. So why wouldn't we
put that lat on
put
it.
it, yeah, put it after we've done the work that you're gonna have to do to verify that they've got a successful amendment? Rather than having to flip back and forth.
Don't disagree. I think it makes sense.
Put that after 6C.
5.9.
Oh, fair point.
Yeah.
Put it put it at the end, so if it's an amendment. Then you're gonna go through the whole process and say, okay, we've done the amendment.
Six B two is reserved, I think that's just like,
It was reserved. It was so that we didn't have to renumber everything when we did, added like another section to the ordinance.
I see.
Before it was, it used to be air landing strips.
Yep.
And no, this one, just take it out and renumber everything, so it's
Okay.
reserved. So that we might maybe add another.
I had not noticed that we've included some that we
Yeah.
don't have, so that makes sense.
Whenever it does become something else again.
Yeah.
You can just throw it in there.
We haven't always had all of 6Bs. So I just wasn't.
Yeah, the forms and the ordinance of.
The heading on the last page, amended conditional use approval, should that just be conditional use approval? Be as 2. Additional.
Yes.
1.
They should be taken as notice.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to have a separate one for amendment.
That last page, it might also be good to have it. Says you have on the first page here that has the number. Would be good to have. So that it doesn't get mixed up.
Like that permit conditions has in addition to all applicable state and town. It can be pink.
So take out, permit,
Slash. Approval.
yeah, it's just approval.
Approval. For the next month. Like to make those changes and. Yeah. Next is a first draft of a shoreline zoning permit application. So, creating a separate application just for shoreline zoning work. That is reviewed by the board, or if Jimmy said to use this too, their office. I don't know, is there shoreline stuff that just goes with code?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this, similar to the DEP one that we used to have years ago?
I don't know about how long ago they used to have it, but it's like, just a model of there's something like that.
It's just another application I'm not too hot about
Hmm.
having to fill out.
Well, you don't have to go with that, but,
Well, shoreline, I would,
well, the applicant.
oh, well, I will fill it out too.
You gotta tell them, you want to it, like, that. That's all of it.
What
But,
does this add to the process?
well, it pulls out really, I think right now, the CEO permit is what's used for shoreline stuff. A lot of times, right, for you.
Yeah.
And then for the board, the conditional use permit application. For this would provide us the specific shoreline permit for the information all relevant to shoreline. About the extra stuff. So it should make it easier for a applicant doing it. Come for the board for the,
And for non-conforming?
that would be in here, like technically, but the checklist is more. Specific to it.
So is this also to accommodate the conditional use application
No, I mean, this is. Really, so
and
that
building permit application and CEO permit?
it would replace those for shoreline stuff. There.
So,
Where they want to fill out the
Oh.
CEO application.
well, the CEO application mixes a lot of stuff.
Right.
It mixes shoreline,
Mhm.
fencing. It's got a lot of like sections to it,
Yeah.
driveways, stuff like that. I just think,
Maybe I'm speaking that.
I just think the now we're having 3 separate applications. Which I don't think you can do away with the CEO one because some of
Yeah.
the stuff is relative to the shoreline we're at. Just, I don't know, kind of clear about having another application.
I mean, generally, the vision I had was that you pull shoreline out. Now, where again, like. You don't have to change the CEO permit necessarily. But if you know it's a project that really only deals with shoreline stuff, it's just simpler for someone to fill out. It's less information that's collected, so it's quicker for your office to read through.
Would that also require us to separate our shoreline out of the land use zoning ordinance and put it in separate ordinance?
I don't think so. You just have to change the way you interpret what CEO means, vehicle usage, where. Kind of, it's being used as sending something directly with CEO permit, as opposed to just getting any permit. Like this, good office will have the first sheet. Get good office, that's not just as little as the CEO permit. They got a site plan review, there's plenty of things that like. Eventually, we'll probably discuss where like it's a CEO permit, but really, it's obviously built. Your office, not a full CEO. Like that's what it is, single family home.
Sounds like we may want to think about this.
Well, that's the first draft, but that's
Yeah,
kind of where the,
definitely.
it made sense, at least if there's.
So these are, you see people or other towns
Yeah, most other towns just have.
do this versus,
Shoreline perking it.
yeah, because you got, new construction, expansion or relocation.
I'm
This
really,
looks similar to what the old shoreline, the old DEP shoreline zoning permit application that was to be vetted with building permits.
Right.
But they did away with them. And I don't know why, but it was similar, you did have to do follow-ups.
Right.
You had to do the 30% expansion calculations. I mean, I think it, maybe other CEOs kind of complained about it because it was just more added work for more review on what they were already doing.
I can look into
Maybe.
that. 'Cause
Yeah, it was, I can't remember when they.
Because every other town on the island, this format took a more.
I remember when I was in Bar Harbor, they had this type of form.
Yeah.
On top of the other building and,
I can look at the history. of what-
yeah.
An observation, like I'm relatively new to this, but I think all of the shoreline stuff that comes in for us, 90% of the time, the projects are so big that people have engaged an architect
Mhm.
who does this stuff. But when we say it is not necessary to have this plan professionally prepared, like I think most of the stuff, people can't do it well on their own, like, you know, I don't want them to think that they can go out and wing it, like, yeah, I think I'm 20 feet from the shore, you know, like,
So like the bigger projects, it would probably get bumped into a different category of either conditional use or like subdivision. But like when I was in Ellsworth, I did have a number of people who came who were just trying to build a deck or move like a shed that was non-conforming.
Mhm.
And like they wouldn't need to hire somebody to come do that, so they could draw
I
that.
agree with that. You should have a survey.
And so there are other mechanisms, of the ordinance that would trigger a review that would allow for this
okay.
to be used. I could try and make that clear, but
Depending on your project, right? Yeah, because I mean, some of these people are like, oh yeah, you know, like, no, I don't think so. Right. You know, especially when they're building
like if you're building new, I mean, depending what it is, like,
elevation, stuff like that. You can't wing that on your own.
no, but like if it's just a corner of the house crosses into the shoreline zone, but the rest of that side of it.
Yeah.
Well, you still have to fill out the permit, but maybe you don't need to hire somebody.
Yeah.
How different is it than the old form you got rid of? How different is this than the old form you got rid of?
Sweet. How different is this than the old form that I used or what I use now? Well, when the DEP had it?
Right.
DEP had it, this is a lot similar too, because they require, even the crosshatch, this type. Because they had the same, similar, you had to have like pre-construction follows post-construction. You had to have, with 30% expansion, you had to calculate floor area and volume at that point. And that's how old it was, because floor area and volume, because now it's just footprint here. Some people still have, I think, the old 30% stuff, other towns. It looks a lot the same as the form that I recall. That I used to do in the harvest, but they did away with them. And like I said, I don't know the rationale behind it, maybe because like I said, it was just so much paperwork. Because people were getting a building permit and they were getting a shoreline permit, you know, on top of that. But I don't know the rationale why they changed it, but this looks very similar to that form.
Then probably the change clause language or the section heading, so with the format, the digital format probably looks. Yeah. But I don't know if it's more paperwork than having switched for like a CEO term.
CEO is very long.
Right.
I don't disagree with you on that. And a lot of it is not applicable, but also a lot of it's covered like stormwater and clearing and that stuff it's good to have as a separate permit.
Yeah.
You know, like in stormwater management and erosion and sedimentation, you know, it's just the CEO permit is very thorough.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, but it's thorough. And that's what people want, you know, that's why we don't have many appeals in this town.
Right.
People are thorough, for the most part. Takes a lot to review a permit.
Yeah.
Thank God I had 30 days, but finally completed, and it's thorough, there's a lot to look at.
It's a lot of things again.
Yeah. It's really, yes, definitely.
I can take another look at this, and think about how it can fit into the existing process a little bit better. Like maybe as an addendum. You know, think about that some. Pretty sure that's the wrong place to start, but trying to fill up stuff out of the, for, make it easier. You just shift things up better, spell permanently.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, yeah, that application is long, a lot of people pass it to me, it's all empty, because they think I need to fill the rest of it out. I'm like, oh my God, and you know, yeah. Yeah, I'm like, you know, and then it's constantly, I'm sending it back, you need to fill it out in its entirety, you know, it's constant.
So. Thinking on that, because that's right, if they're not figuring out the process, then you have to change the process. But best way.
I mean, I don't see why like fences, you know, but and again, I didn't create the forms that the town has.
Yeah.
But like the building permit, it, you know, it has fences once approved here to be issued, but also I have jurisdiction over fences. But like driveways, I have jurisdiction, but in the shoreline, if somebody wants to go close, you know, then they have jurisdiction. So it's like, it's mixed, a lot of it's intermixed, but I see like, I don't see why like fences can't be taken out of the CDO permit application and just put with the building permit.
Right.
And same with driveways, why does it have to be a separate application?
Right.
But but even with building permits, I mean, I'd still ask for the same information and the same detail of information, because the building permit application states you have to have a stormwater management plan, and then also there's a submitted checklist on the back of the permit application that they have to submit, which covers everything that's
Right.
pretty much in the CEO permit. So I might be able to do away with that. But I'm telling
I don't know, because in Ellsworth, we never had like bill permits for just one sheet,
you. Yeah,
let's fill them out.
yeah, that's how it was in Bar Harbor.
For some stuff.
Yeah,
Fences.
Yeah,
driveways.
yeah.
Driveways would permit for that separately, the public works, stuff too, but. Cross Ross Code was just one permit.
Mhm.
And like single family homes, unless it was big enough.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to like, no.
Yeah, and you got two families, one family on the same permit, land use building permit, because it's a land use and building. So it's the use
Mhm.
establishment plus what you're doing, construction, building, you know, so that accessory buildings.
See, that's what I think, like where, our ordinance, most other ordinances, it's just permitted. Keeps the reviews only through the building permit process, and so it's clear. Right, so like, you know, if there are a lot, all streets have that, everything, which is put all the sort of documentation. They look for.
Who had time to go and measure every permit, I don't, yeah, and it says on, you know, scaled site plan is required, but it also says on the application. You know, it's up to you to know where your property lines are,
Yeah.
you know, and they sign it, so they're signing it saying they know where they are.
Or if they're often neighbors.
And something happens,
And it's astonishing when I meet people who don't know where their property lines.
it's common.
I mean, I've sold a house and I have had to go back so many times and say, let me show you again where the property line. It's just,
Well, I tell people, if you can find,
I was like,
string it,
well, this depends.
you know, with your deal, you try to find and see if you can find another one, sometimes you can,
I know, but I don't think they like ever.
And in the past, the tree's gone, or the retaining wall.
Yeah, the private bridge.
Back in the, yeah, back in the day, they used like trees and
Yes.
walls. For boundaries, but.
Oh, maybe we'll have a conversation later, or have offline about the process, just trying to figure out, like you for next meeting, I had changes to data use. Potential and for my opinions, so.
Yeah.
I imagine because town, might not like, but just be an idea of how to lower both boards' workload and your workload. You shift things to a quicker turnaround for some type of smaller development types.
Can I go go back and ask a question about the continuing use application.
Mhm.
When we get to the conclusions of law, the sections, I'm a little concerned, I mean, I think I know what I mean when I would say conclusion of law, so in each section, it says, section 5.6 is not applicable except for sections, blah, blah. And then you say, oh, conclusion. That's the conclusion of law, that those sections are applicable. What do you expect us to do in terms of articulating in that section how, as a matter of law, the facts that we have found meet the standards? What should we be saying in there to not raise?
All right, so for any of the.
Any of, like, in basically anyone.
Yeah, for any of the sections that are above that don't matter, I would just worry about like the explanation of checking NA or whatever it is.
Yeah.
In notes, you could put a sentence about why it's not applicable. In general, you check NA, and it's self-explanatory, that's just not
Yeah,
relevant to the project, so then really all you'd explain in the notes probably for inclusion of law is. Why that section that does apply to the project. And that's really it. If you're finding the fact is how it meets the standard. The conclusion of law is why you use that standard. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's essentially saying like, well, this project does include a hotel and motel,
right.
so we have to apply the standard to this.
So the conclusion of law is that this provision applies.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all the board has to find. Okay.
Next is, unless anyone has comments on that, I mean, it sounds like they should have a separate conversation on the shoreline permit and try to figure out access. Mind that a little bit better. Didn't go into this one, yeah, we're going for the non-conformity shoreline zone application, checklist. Specifically for non-conformity in the shoreline zone. Prepare with it, this is the flow chart behind that checklist. Mostly because I found in making the checklist, I was really just kind of copying and pasting the ordinance. I couldn't really think of a easy way to make a checklist with these provisions, except breaking them out and just step by, like, making sure everyone gets right as you go through the section. I did reorder them a little bit, so they are a little shorter sometimes, but for the most part, it's exactly what's in the ordinance. But then if you get the relocation, adaptation, reconstruction, or replacement, they kind of make more sense as checklists.
Right, because those are the ones that kind of drive, the relocation kind of drives you nuts because you have to go back and forth in the ordinance between, that refers you back to other sections. And so what I felt when I looked at that is, do we have a little bit of, because I'm all about how this is going to flow for us and like sort of rationally go through it. Do we have a little bit of cart before the horse stuff in 4.5? For example, in 4.3.6, do we need to find those before we can get to 4.5? And if so, should we have those in the form ahead of 4.5?
You do need to do 4.3.6 for us because that's establishment of who has jurisdiction.
Right. So shouldn't we have that first and then we go through
You
the
do.
lot size slope?
Yeah, you do that. And then once you do determine that, you go to 4.3.5 and you start your.
Right, but the way he's laid out the form is, what I want is we go through the form in order and we don't have to fumble around going back and forward. So if we had 4.3.6 ahead in the form of 4.3.4, we can just keep rolling through this form when we're processing the application as opposed to having to say, well, wait a minute, we gotta do this first. It's non-conformity for dummies, which is on that. Always
think we're supposed to say mentally challenged, no, don't.
Oh, well, I've got all those books that I'm gonna throw. I don't have those, books, but.
So Gail, in that list of 4.3.6, referring to 14.3.5 in the middle of it, we wouldn't have gone over that yet. Replacement construction complies with setbacks to grades and stuff. Isn't that what we checked if we've gone through the whole thing? Well, we've gone through 4.3.
Right, I mean, the problem with that, as Kim points out, is 4.3.6 essentially establishes that we have jurisdiction to go ahead and do.
To do it.
4 and 5.
We wouldn't be able to answer that question.
You could put most of this up here, right under the heading.
Well, it could go over here, because we don't need to find that stuff for expansion, do we? 4.3.6. We're only talking
The
about,
reconstruction replacement. No, expansions obviously expanded this, footprint.
right. So we don't, 4.3.6 only relates to reconstruction or replacement, and that's 4.3.4, that's the page 4. Stuff in the front of that is just if you're gonna expand industrial and anything.
Well, I'm trying to think, because then there's other parts like 4.3. 3 says that it has to meet required of section 4.3.6. Before you continue with 4.3.3. That's also in there because it's something about 4.3.2, which it's an American. Oh, that's what they put that on the week. I'm trying to figure out where we're all, we should be able to get a flow chart that are for all. The expanded part.
Yeah, I guess what, if you've had the pleasure of sitting through some of our processing of applications that involve reconstruction or replacement, it's very complicated. For me, speak for myself, it's very complicated figuring out in what order we do things. And I don't care what the numbers are on the sections of the ordinance. I just want to know how is the best way to sequentially figure out how we're going to rule on that application. And if the way you've got it is the best way to do it, then that's fine, but it just seems to me that we've got to do some 6 findings before we can go to 4 and 5. 3, 4 and 5. I mean, we gotta ask, like, is the structure been destroyed, and do we have a? Those are sort of foundational questions. Has there been an appraiser? Because you can go through the whole process of saying, well, of assessing the project as it's laid before you, and then say, oh, but wait, when you get all done to that, it's like, oh, we don't have the appraisal. That's the next to the list.
I think I just missed the numbers. I have 4.5, but I don't think 4.5. Something 0.5 probably. So it's just a different part of 4.3.
Yeah.
Is this 4.35 or 4.5? 3.5 is the rebate statement. Greatest preference is 4.5 or 4.5.
I guess all I'm trying to do, get all done, as I said, is is have the form, things laid out in the order which is most logical for us to have to decide things, rather than have to flip around between documents. And if you've got it right, then you've got it right, and if it's not, because I have a question about it.
I don't know if there was a right answer. I think it's more about what you guys are most comfortable with.
Am I wrong in thinking it makes sense to do a bunch of the 4.3.6 questions first? We have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are provisions in 4.3.6 that require you to have already checked 4.3.52. They kind of cross-reference each other a bunch. But there are like important questions in 4.3.6 that you need to start 4.3.5. Then there are provisions that specifically say you have to cover 4.3.5 and 4.3.6 before you can make a final decision.
Right.
Then maybe it's not doing it, or maybe just figuring out how to figure out which questions are most important, moving just to the top somewhere. I think in the site overview section for like reconstruction or replacement only. And just leave the questions that make sense at the end of 4.3.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Or for that.
The thing about that. The thing about that reference back to 4.3.5 is that's like a major. I mean, to me, it's like it's an example of crappy drafting of the ordinance because.
No, that's state word for word.
Yeah, I know, crappy drafting of the statute. Because it requires you to flip back to, there's not to different section. So you're not actually finding in the reconstruction or replacement, you're not answering the 4.3.5 question before you get to 4.6. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
So it isn't like it's out of place here. It's like you have to flip back to that section of the.
Yeah, but you should do a 4.3.6 and then go to 4.3.5.
Right, so you're
Like
still
you said.
with it, so it's still,
There's still not a logical flow that in terms of the way you're thinking of it. You have to flip back or forth one way or the other.
But I mean, yeah, 4.3.6 should be first, without a doubt. And then below that, a breakdown of probably 4.3.5 below it. And then the appraisers are 4.3.6.
yes.
And the not has, the conformity has not been increased. About, the non-conformity has not been increased for reconstruction replacement, so you're looking at. So, granted, you're looking at what was there and what's being proposed, right? So you're making sure there's no increase or encroachment into the non-conformity.
Then you get the relocation to
I mean,
beyond the required setback when you possibly can. Those are
That's the greatest, yeah.
preliminary questions.
I get why 4.3.5 is first. In terms of statute, because this relocation is its own thing.
Yeah.
You can have 4.5.3, 4.3.5 without 4.3.6, so it's kind of like your standalone.
Right, in some ways, it would have been easier if they just sort of re-articulated those relevant provisions in 4.2.
Right.
And then, challenge ones like mine.
Not typically would be relocation, would be you wanting to relocate a building within the house. Kind of like we did in Fleet,
Mm-hmm.
moved it back, put a new foundation on it, still didn't meet setbacks.
I think really what,
Got out of the wet,
But we determined that it was as far back as it could go.
from the water, but yeah, closer to the road.
Yeah.
But either way, it's, I mean, that was ten.
Mhm.
what they probably should have done was just have 4.3.5 be the relocation of portion that's specifically about the structure. Then do 4.3.6, and then have 4.3.7 be about vegetation. That can reference back to both 4.3.5 or 4.3.6, depending on which you're talking about.
I created months.
No, but it does, it throws you around into those sections.
Right, and I guess when the rubber meets the road and we're trying to process the application, how can we get through it?
I don't think there's really an easy way.
And I guess like, just make the form follow the format I would have done if I drafted this statute. Again, like. It's like I'll have numbers, and finding of fact sections that you'll have to check that might look more like the short form. Like some of these, they just stay the way they are, like the expansion part. I think it's fine the way it is. When it comes to relocation of the structure and relocation or, oh, because I do have it, I'll just move the relocation of vegetation portion.
Yeah, the
After
expansion,
4.3.6.
the expansion part kind of isn't that. It's more, it's like a lot of it's just mathematical distances.
So they just have a million different types of
Yes,
expansion.
like 25 80. But it's when we get into the reconstruction or replacement that it gets.
Yeah, so I might swap, I'll just put the 4.3.5 section block that's about vegetation after 4.3.6. I'll keep the other 4.3.5. Really, the 4.5, where it is.
Okay. Let's see how that looks like.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I appreciate you tolerating my struggle. All with the ultimate goal of making the motion intelligible.
So how does, section about floodplain come in from? They allow you to go 3 feet or above the BFA.
Expansions.
2.2.
They have a section for that. Right, 'cause that is one section that's another part of the ordinance. You're right, but I think shouldn't be under 4.3.2. It should be its own section, something else.
Yeah,
But it should apply more to just expansions, but the way that it's written here is that it only applies to expansions.
Right.
Even if you do a new build, you're allowed to do.
it says, yeah, because it's the structure must be relocated, reconstructed, replaced, or elevated.
I can probably do this, something similar to that and just break it out at 4.3.2. At the end, because they'll have to look at it for every type of project. Just making the third section. Just do. But I guess I'll just go through and reorganize this as it. If I drafted it, what I think makes sense. And just break things out from their 4 point whatever. Just put it in order that makes sense.
So people can theoretically relocate and expand at the same time.
Yes.
So you might end up.
subtract and replace.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have the foundation section? Did I miss
So I
that?
just made a note that
Okay,
I left that.
because that's in there too.
3.3 and 4.34 the mountain with the way this. Go over the flow chart just real quick, because that only applies to expansions. I can do these, or try and do these for every other part of the flow. Ordinance too, while I'm making this, I'm gonna reorganize it in a way. That's kind of like that flow of. Regardless of where a provision is, I'll just put it in order of how you would have to look at it, so that things apply to all. Shoreline projects, even if it's just under the expansion section. It could still apply to like a relocation, that's an expansion. I can make a code chart for each type of shoreline, if that would be helpful.
DEP has something with this.
There's there. Because it tries to squeeze everything into one flow chart instead of. Like doing one for each section.
I've been in many shoreline trainings and that's always good. I think they've changed the material.
I might have noted now this code enforcement's in there. More forward than being permanent. But I mean, essentially, the pink ones are endpoints. The only difference or change that I have for this one is that there should be an arrow. That's endpoint to the resource protection question, because even if it does apply, you could still be in the resource protection zone. You have to check for that, but. Otherwise, just walk you through if it's a yes or no question. Or any of the projects next month in shoreline zone. Actions that get passed down.
No,
I guess shoreline.
Fences. Down with the marina, that's up right over.
Any questions on that?
Part, what?
It's that the really fun part. Yeah. So next is, yeah, the second portion of the supplemental ordinance. Table of content principle. But after that, shouldn't be that different in jobs from your seat, but there were some changes. And then we're gonna go through sections 4.2. 4.3, 4.4, 4.5. 4.6, 4.7. So 4.2 is plan review requirements. This is already, it's outlined what needs to be turned in for each type of plan. So the first was sketch plan. Only, which is for every type of sketch plan that comes. What an applicant will need to provide, be limited, it's the sketch plan, so a conversation can be had for, I guess, first look at the project. So the reminder, sketch plans are required for all major subdivisions. But sketch plan is optional for any minor subdivisions, but they. Also made us like come ahead of time, with here to four slots. There are some, as I go through these lists, there are some items where I put them in, but I'm open to thoughts on whether or not they should be allowed at a certain point, so like for sketch plan. I requested the Hancock County Soil Survey for subject property, is because it's easy to obtain, and you just go online and fill it out. The information's not super critical, in my opinion, for a sketch plan, or we can like. I don't know what you can see that when you're reviewing a project, if you want to look at the soil survey particularly hard, but.
I'm you're ahead of me, so maybe I'm just slow, but, I get a little confused, the stuff that you handed out last time when you started the subdivision ordinance,
Mhm.
that kind of was you had the beginning pieces of it, and then later on, you added some 4.7. Final decision procedures, which is under 3.2.10, which is different than what you gave us today. So I'm trying to figure out, first of all, what to do with that stuff from the draft that you gave us on the fourth.
What do you mean it's different? So 4.7 is now performance guaranteed, and 4.8 is the final decision.
Right, but what you gave us last time, there's a 4.7, which is final decision procedure. So that kind of confused me.
So the section title or number may have changed, but the content.
Okay, all right.
But now.
And it also just was out of order last. Trying to figure out which one we were.
Well, last time I was at work, because the final procedures were procedural, and I just covered all the procedural stuff last time. This time, I think everything is in order.
Okay,
Yes. But we added 4.7, started 4.2, and we're covering everything.
um. 4.2, when you talk about the sketch plan review. It says the application form will require information such as. Is that setting up a problem? Like a big problem?
No, I mean, because the item that's required is the completed application form. The next part is just a descriptor of what the application form is,
Okay,
and so they need to fill out everything. Either turning it a completed form, everything's relevant to them, but just describe.
So we'll have a form for that, because right now we don't have.
And then that was, you see the first draft of that. So no, that's not anything to worry about, it's just, it's a such as, it's also not. Saying illustrative, not fun.
okay. And then 4.2.2, if I could, and at the end of 4.2.2A, it says the application should be filled out with. And I think that appears somewhere else in here too, and then that kind of just drops off.
We had a thought. If I actually finished it.
So that's on the page, where we got me for this meeting is page 4.
Yeah, and I see where it's both, happens on page 8 again. I will. Think about what I meant.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But kind of jump back up to 4.2.1 real quick. So like, how do you guys use the Hancock County Soil Survey? Do you use it really, or is it just kind of information that's in the back of it, just jump over?
It's usually provided.
Well, it's provided, but like, it's
There's,
useful.
but no,
Yeah.
I mean, it tells you what the soils are.
Right. But you don't
What
know.
yeah, no,
It's like it was made to require somewhere else to find for complete, and this doesn't have to be a sketch. But
yeah, I
it's,
don't think that's helpful during a sketch,
it's easy to
because, yeah, because the sketch is just a very pre-land, but kind of letting the board know what's being proposed.
Right. I'll just shoot the phone, right? And then I did have, so there's two apps, so I've taken Hancock County Soil Survey, this will be the list of any traffic studies, facility studies. State of federal permits, blah, 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 and other due diligence that might be needed. Put that in a sketch, because hopefully. The applicant is aware, has hired someone who's aware of those things. But it would also be potentially a chance for you to educate somebody on what's needed.
Right.
But then that is a little bit of extra work for you guys, but I think you'd probably be comfortable knowing what you expect for certain types of projects, that sort of thing.
As long as we can be trusted to understand what is actually needed. I mean,
Well-
if you quiz me right now, I would go, right.
Would a traffic study or a utility study be required for a certain amount of lots?
Well, as we get further down, there's no like threshold for like a full traffic study. The only part of traffic that has to be required every time is the IT estimated generation. But then again, if it's like a huge subdivision, the board has the ability to request a
Yeah.
more detailed
Yeah,
traffic.
from like ADOT, but, I just didn't know if that would be some, an added expense for somebody at first, and come to find out. But
Well, they wouldn't have to provide the study, they just have to
That's
agree on the list of.
Well, it's sketch, right, so it's sketch
That's
plan,
sketch.
this is when the board could just determine, you can determine at any point. Right? That sketch or preliminary, if they need to provide more information. I guess I'm finally technically can see, but hopefully that's not. what happens.
We wouldn't be looking at a study, a traffic study at that.
I mean, you could, in theory, the developer could be super sophisticated and decide.
Oh, sure.
But if it's not required, it probably won't happen. Essentially.
What a letter from like, water district or public works? Be acceptable, do you think? Well, because they would know the infrastructure, I would think, in the area,
Or one.
or like a utility study or.
Well, so that's not required, just, I mean, like, so a utility study in my mind. Cause like, if you know, again, like, if the board sees a sketch plan project, they know the location. Of the project, and maybe there's water pressure issues, or there's not a lot of groundwater, or whatever. They may require a more like detailed, study for water pressure, or. The size for septic, like whether or not, what the impact of this large septic system might be on the groundwater. That's when like the local knowledge comes in, because that's not. Really required anywhere, except for the hydrogeological studies required for grading ponds, but. The rest, like those types of studies are really optional, it's on the board to determine they need to request for that, but they have the power to do so.
Mhm.
And so it's just really an opportunity, the applicant should know. If they need state or federal permits, they should kind of have an idea if their project will be big enough to require a full traffic study. Or they might need one for TOC anyway, so they're gonna just provide one to the city or to town as well. The potential waiver requests, they probably have in mind, they should have in mind what the waivers they're gonna ask for. Or it's just a discussion really, if they might think we might have for a waiver, just getting the board's opinion on how, like, asking a waiver, but the provision goes. And that sort of thing.
This would be helpful, kind of similar to what the Harvard has when they sit, the applicant. Go through a checklist,
Yeah.
tell them what they should ask for waivers on,
Well, so.
which we don't have a
The town
plan.
should never tell them.
No, but I've seen it,
But,
but anyways,
It's just that this is. I mean, this just would be helpful if we had a plan.
well, I can like, so if Harvard does what else, does Michelle build the
Yeah.
systems, there's a technical review where they have full staff, and they all sit down together for your project. So sketch plan is really the version of that, you don't have a staff to do technical report. Although I do think, I would probably should do some full technical review.
Maybe someday.
But that's it for sketch plan, again, it's supposed to be pretty low barrier, it doesn't really require a professional. A freehand sketch, just to give the board an idea of what the project would look like, and the more work they do for sketch ahead of time, the better their timeline probably looks for getting everything done for preliminary final. But they're just kind of casually coming in to get. From the board, that's what sketch is also for, they can come to sketch as many times as they want. In theory. Next is 4.2.2. So I did break down, just last time, those reminder. Subdivisions involving land and then subdivisions that are just for structures. So subdivisions that involve land involve just lots or lots and a combination of lots and structures in the same project. So. Really, the requirements are almost the same. This section of the 4.2. Just because it's all, there's a lot of useful information that you're gonna wanna know about, even if there is just structure. If there is just a lot. But later on, where it's gonna get short, where the structures have a lower barrier to get subdivided. Land does. But currently what's the plan? We're still gonna wanna see like. Where wetlands are, if the building might exist already, but. Maybe they have to increase the parking or whatever. They are gonna still wanna see like where wetlands are. That sort of thing. Most of this is state required, so if you have questions about anything, feel free to ask it, but my answer would probably be well, the state requires it.
So it's a state 250,
to.
but notified.
No, that was just based on discussion last
No,
night.
no, I didn't know if state had a certain distance, because I was thousands,
No,
so
they just say butters.
that's all they say?
Yeah, and so 250 seemed fair to me, like I did a test of like.
Yeah,
What it would look like different zones, towns. 200 felt a little short, especially if you're outside like the full pond. But 250,
Yeah.
the extra 50 feet made a difference.
Can I ask a question about that? In some ways, it makes sense to break it down by land only versus. But under what circumstances is somebody gonna subdivide land? And you don't anticipate there's gonna be buildings?
Well, it's not that you don't anticipate there will be buildings, but if the developer comes and only does the lots, they're not responsible for.
And then they're gonna sell the lots?
Yeah, they sell a lot, and that person will build.
And then you're gonna build, yeah, okay.
But if you're doing a project where you split two lots and then build two duplexes on each lot, then you're subdividing structures and lots of the project.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Generally speaking, I think that all of these subdivisions in particular, but maybe even more than that, I'd like to see us pay really close attention to, when you're not around town water, and the adequacy of the water supply, the existing draw and the ability to successfully and easily maintain sufficient water for the existing uses as well as new uses, I think. I mean, we don't have aquifers here. It's all just like stuff seeping down to the ledge. And I think we should always, you talk about that, like what kind of studies and so forth should we be requiring? I think in any of these, we should be requiring as good an understanding as we can get of the capacity of this land to support a structure on it.
How would they do that? Other than,
I,
doesn't the state have a site where there's hydrology wells? And it tells you I found one once, the depth of people as well as in a certain area,
Ones that are done.
the document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can't, they don't have method projects what you're.
No, but they're like anybody that may have reported, I don't know if the well companies do that. And they report it and they put like a dot on the map and you click on it and it tells you, yeah, the year from the
Dr. Harper engaged a hydrology expert maybe 20 years ago to test the aquifers out, along. Trying to think of the district, but it's the Crooked Road wall, the subdivisions went up.
Mhm.
There is a lot of ledge, but it can be done. I mean, it needs to be updated. And that's always the question that people are asking, like, are we overusing our not even aquifer, but are we stretching the resources that are coming down through the ledge? There are pools of water aquifers out there, but Town Hill, Crooked Road, all of that, they were able to get an assessment, but it doesn't really seem to be used much as a restriction or a limitation or a consideration.
I just think we overlook it at our peril.
Yeah, they never responded. Any well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how big, like, of the development you think you'll get, like,
Sure.
there are some towns. Stonington now, there are subdivisions.
Oh, yeah.
And Blue Hill, we're the only two towns that have this, but they have like, if you're project draws more than like 2,700 gallons of water per day or something like that, you have to provide more information on groundwater.
Mhm.
Let's take a while to get to 2,700 gallons. So like, I don't think either town would really ever have a project that would have crossed that
I
threshold.
mean, they're trucking water in. Stonington's trucking water in.
Right. But it makes sense for like a town like Stonington.
Right.
But here again, like, I don't.
I mean, there are people who have funky wells around here, drilled wells.
Right, well, it's about the size of the development, like they have it in their ordinance, but they've never actually used it because no developments come that's triggered. I mean, maybe like a commercial use would be more likely to trigger that type of use than a subdivision, but it's because no one's building like 20 house subdivisions.
Well, I think it comes through greater density on lots too. It's a factor that we've got to think about. You know, what do we increase the structure, the superstructure, the infrastructure and put more water pipes in or? Anyway, okay.
Oh, that's an interesting thing. Yeah. You know, somebody could subdivide, you know, say 50 acres and, you know, half of it's not gonna have any water. You buy a lot and then you have the water.
The town already had an existing Slater on the wells specifically, like a provision.
Yeah, there is some language where you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, just copy and pasting what was already in the town's ordinance for well.
I mean, the business of asking for a statement from well drillers, whether or not there's enough water around, didn't inspire great confidence.
So
Oh, yeah. Money.
drill, baby, drill. But some of it says like, oh, I guess the only thing about it is that some wells are like, where if you can't drill a well.
I mean, I've drilled had a 500. In my lifetime.
Well, again, like you do have the flexibility to request as much information as you want.
Right. I do think we should be aware.
Again, I think it should be more geographic based, so you don't make it fire break project because you're connected with city water or town water.
Oh, yeah, no, it's town bar, that's, I mean. There's capacity there too, but it's a different.
You have like the other studies. Section.
Thank you.
Discussing preliminary plan.
Oh, well, it's gonna be under fine, actually, is what I'm looking for, on page 8. It says water to be supplied by on-site well or wells, a letter from a local well driller or hydrologist familiar with the area indicating it's likely the water supply will be added to water to be supplied. So in your mind, I should cross out well driller
Yeah.
and just have them do a hydrogeologist.
Yeah. You answer a general question for me. When you talk about current zoning district property and dimensional requirements in tabular form, I'm afraid I don't know what in tabular form means.
So, just on the plan, there'll be a table that's essentially like a snapshot of your table. If you just,
Yes.
and it has to be on the plan so that we're looking at it, just know what those requirements were. So whether it's usually just the dimensional requirements,
Okay.
minimum lot size, that's.
Okay. Thank you.
Especially preliminary for involving land only. With those ones.
No.
Those plan. Um. I just have to explain themselves, to make sure they put out such things. Kind of like street addressing approved by the town or 911 addressing officer. Like ideally, the final minutes before you all have had a conversation with. The assessor, just with time. With
He
the.
doesn't usually give out
Officer.
addresses until a permit's been issued.
Oh, that's what Noel's question was, but I was like, well, they just make it a condition of the approval that they have to. Get the E911 approved before they can get their permits, but you have to do a permit before they'll do E911. Okay, so I can just remember that. That's one. And those are those different. items.
Yeah.
I always made them get E911, the assessor report.
Unless they have a shared driveway, they're gonna name it.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yep.
I know,
Does the board,
I don't wanna say this.
the board doesn't look at restrictive covenants?
No, but you still want copies of them on the plan and need to
Well-
review them.
But the thing is, if they're on the plan, then the board
Board has authority.
No, because the plan will also get
Enforce it.
registered in that county registry. So that's where,
I know, but if they're on the plan from.
Then the board is
experience,
approving of them.
You approve and they're on there and say like, I don't know. Was one that I dealt with, Sergeant Jeffrey and.
trees, there's something about trees and one of them.
I can't remember what it was, but there was covenant put on a plan. And because it was on the plan, they had to come back to the board and get it removed or something like that.
Well, yeah.
Because it was on the plan, but
Is it a salt air?
I can't remember where I think it was, Rock Garden Way, I think, subdivision.
I hear that, I don't think it's a problem. You think it's a problem with that?
well, it's just, I don't think the board, I don't think the board wants jurisdiction over restricted.
They don't have such jurisdiction over it.
If they do, if they're on the plan.
No, they can force those covenants even from the plan. What they have jurisdiction over is the plan itself. So they're approving the plan without the covenants on it again.
Yeah, but they're on it.
Right.
If they're on it.
But if like someone breaks that covenant, this town cannot enforce the covenant.
No, but there was,
We're by signing it, we're making the determination that those covenants are part of the plan. I mean, can there be some confusion there that,
I don't.
no, we're passing.
I think you should check on that because I know we dealt with.
It's like you're adopting the covenant.
you are, they're accepting the covenants and, no, but it was on the plan.
Right.
If they're like separate and they're like recorded in the registry of deeds, but not on the plan, they don't have jurisdiction.
I'll ask them.
I can tell you,
I wish I could remember.
there was,
It's like, it's just illegal for it down to interfere with private.
but it was just because it was on the plan.
Right there.
It was on the plan and the board signs it.
That records.
Yeah, but the board signs it and it's
So I
recorded.
think.
But if they were, if they were separate and not on the plan, but they were part of the application, but the board, they were just in there. Board doesn't sign them. They're just put in there, but the plan was signed and I know there was something where Margaret Jeffrey was involved.
If it's contentious, it certainly can be read. Right.
I mean, because a lot of times you see developers put no trailers or say no home occupation. Well, the board can't accept that because those are allowed in the ordinance.
Right. All right, let's double check that, because I,
It seems to me, at least it creates an ambiguity. But I remember,
I think it was Rock Garden Way.
In a lot of examples where plans get amended to just delete verbiage.
Covenants.
They're not actually changing what.
No, it's just the covenants that were placed on the plan and recorded on the plan and signed by the board.
I'll check that. Question, I can just change the wording of. Provide a copy of the plan.
All right.
It's final. Yeah, so I guess some of these things in final could be moved to preliminary and it's more about what when it's helpful in the process for you all to see it, but then like. The only requirement in final, developer could bring it to preliminary and get the feedback ahead of time. So it's about that balance of when do you want to press them that information versus. You know, they're doing their job pretty well, they'll bring it early anyway and just have the final version ready when it's actually required in final. But you just can't guarantee that necessarily. So like the erosion control plan. And maybe helpful to see that in preliminary at the time. Or the stormwater plan, although I didn't think stormwater is in. But yeah. Sorry, I was saying like that could be the preliminary, but you're required in final, but someone might not bring it preliminary if it's not required, and only bring it final, the project might get held up because there's a problem with it. Or no. So it's really just a preference and what your experience has been. When is it useful for you all to see like a certain piece of information?
Would 17 go under buildings and not land? 6, 6.
No, because yeah, this could have structures and land, so it's under there because if there is structures.
But I thought this was just involving land, which,
Of projects that involve land, but that also includes the little underlying part, the simultaneous division of those land and structures. So again, if someone splits the lot, but also builds like a dwelling units that.
Oh,
to split.
With land.
yeah, that's structures.
Yeah, there's no good thing.
When you have in, under the final plan, you have description of solid waste and demolition waste disposal.
Yes.
What does that mean? Is this during construction? Is this what?
So the construction solid waste is during construction, what are you gonna do with your demolition waste and all that, and I call it construction waste, either one works.
So
And
this is,
solid waste.
this is how you gonna do it during construction.
Yes. Well, that's the demolition or construction waste part, solid waste is after the fact, let's get the trash, from people over them,
Right, so which are we asking for and
so.
maybe we ought to save that one clearly. I mean, I didn't understand what I meant.
Oh, I can just make them two separate.
Description plans for solid waste disposal. But again, if it's just land. Then it gets a little funky, because if it's just land, then that's not gonna be. Shouldn't it be construction and demolition waste disposal? We're not necessarily demolishing.
I mean, it could be, so I guess I could add construction instead of demolition, I'll make that its own thing, and solid waste.
Where are you?
It's in.
Under the final plan in,
Page 8 and at the top.
I think you do wanna know what they're gonna do with solid waste, even if somebody, like even if they don't. Even if there's just lots, I mean, like they're still gonna provide like road association or homeowner association documents, for potentially, but like drafts of what this could look like. So like, that could have a dumpster there, it could just be a community, like a neighborhood dumpster instead of. If it's not served by trash pickup, I should know how house to house trash pickup here works. Does it go across the entire town?
Oh, they go.
Probably not a need for dumpster.
Scroll past them.
I mean. They'll go on private lanes if you can, they go down mine in the summer. That's my neighbor's one. So the people don't travel in the trash. But they won't go down if it's a challenge to get down either. You asked the question a minute ago about. Are there things that we're asking for in the final plan that we want to maybe ask for in the preliminary?
Yeah.
And then if you look on what's skipping ahead here. it's 4.2.6, additional studies the board may require, the following acts may be required of the planning board for any project review to do the second during the preliminary review plan. So that kind of suggests that we want to. All right, first question is, can we not ask for these sorts of things during the final review plan? And but it also suggests the desirability of requesting additional studies up front so that the process can move smooth.
Yeah, I mean, so I think. Because my idea was that you want it to be as predictable for a developer to come in, so they don't want to surprise them with things out of the final plan. Like the board review as much as possible. So implicitly, they'd want to bring you more information on preliminary ahead of time, but it's only fully required final, but again, developers are actually, things like that, they might wait to bring it also final anyway and screw themselves over. So, yeah, it's probably just worth making a lot of that stuff, do that preliminary, and then final should.
That should just be the plan coming to be signed.
Right.
The final.
Should
They shouldn't be,
Later.
they shouldn't be accepting additional, I mean, they should find an application complete, and if it's not complete, then don't find it complete, and this is the stuff we need.
Yeah.
And then once it's received and you guys are accepting it and it's, you know, satisfies what you were looking for, then you find it complete. And at that next meeting, it should be just them bringing the plan for signature.
Right, so I did read the state statute, but I can't tell you at this moment if the state statute breaks these things down
It does not.
into preliminary plans and
No.
so. Wouldn't the process be better if we had a sketch plan and then the application? And we could break the review of it down into a preliminary review and then ask finding out if we need anything else, and then the final review. As opposed to getting the information in drips and drabs and as a preliminary plan and a final plan. Would there be advantages to doing it that way?
I mean, I guess there would be some advantages, I mean, it's not too different than there are certain things that you really don't need until final.
But you're gonna find, when are you gonna find the plan? When do you find the application complete?
At the preliminary plan.
But we won't have had all the things that they're required to submit because.
Well, so your completeness would only be based on the thing that you're requiring preliminary to determine, which that's the town saying we would consider an application complete with just these things. If there's small things that come final, let's find like a letter from Maine Historic Preservation Commission. They're not always timely.
Sure.
Getting the letter back. So it's smaller things like that could be final that are less consequential presumably.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully, right, but. If they're not, then it comes off early, but. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a town that has everything to do at preliminary. The final is just,
I guess maybe it's because you're just calling it preliminary. Right? I mean, you're gonna apply for subdivision. Approval of a subdivision. Why not why not, you have the sketch plan. So you kind of talk it out. And why not then submit the application? And you may have those things that aren't, it's gonna take time to get.
Mhm.
And you do a preliminary
Application.
review,
yes, plan too. Get that application done overall.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out what would be the cleanest way for everybody
Mhm.
involved.
Well, that's what I was kind of struggling with, which was where to put certain information be required, because if like certain things take longer to finish, or like if you're doing a well delineation. Maybe you can do almost all of it, but you need to wait till spring to work on pools. Making things to a final gives the developer a little bit of extra time to kind of get that information together, but their project is still in the preliminary phase. But the board.
But the application isn't complete, because
Well, in your mind, no, but if you don't require that till final, it could be found complete based on what the town is saying is an application.
They can put conditions on it.
But the town isn't,
Yeah.
but the planning board isn't gonna act on the application until you've met additional requirements that are in the final plan. So it's complete light.
It's complete based on what the town has decided needs to be required to find completeness.
So I don't,
Which doesn't happen, which
which you
how
should
much
be
was
accepting anything is fine.
accepted, and I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place.
You shouldn't be accepting anything in final.
I mean, that's what, yeah, I mean, it's not to me, like I.
No, but I mean, like, no, but an application, once it's complete, that means they satisfied all the criteria through the town. What we look for. I hear what you're saying,
Okay.
but
Maybe,
I-
maybe the details aren't satisfactory, but they provided the document that meets. Right, that
Yep.
meets the definition of soil erosion.
Yeah,
but then you get a documentation and then you get someone in the audience
Yeah.
that brings something up about that, and you're at final. Is that fair to that applicant? So say, oh, hey, they brought up a good point. Maybe you should go back and ask for this additional information.
That's why, one of the reasons I'm asking this question, so that we
When
can.
would you get like a?
You know, it's weird because subdivisions, when you review them, the public hearing is at the final. So the people technically, but Bill allows them because he's
I
a
was gonna
good,
say, I always.
allows them to
look hearings
speak.
At every stage, so that you get all that input early, and then you can fix.
yeah, but then this,
But if you allow it at the final,
if you allow
I
it,
feel like.
well, exact, but that's really the only time though that people really will show up and will ask things at that point, or if that's the board is just saying, no, tonight's completeness, we're just making sure we have an exhibit and it's acceptable, I guess, and but technically, the completeness doesn't say it's a public hearing
Right.
either.
So,
Public hearing is at final
The-
hearing.
right, well, legally require public hearings in the final. I always did public hearings throughout the process, so that, yeah, people could talk whenever. I always had people coming. In the earlier stages, as soon as I got the abutter notice, they get angry and they come. But it was good, because then like you hear about it early. Again, like a lot of times they would complain about things that aren't in the ordinance, so it's like, well,
Right.
they talk to the developer, see if they'll work with you, but like, too bad.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a little different here, where, you know.
that's one thing, if somebody's coming in to see you in your office. But when you're trying to conduct a planning board meeting. And those things are coming in and the same arguments in many cases are coming in at every meeting.
Well,
And then the final does not become the final. The final is the pre-final, or maybe the pre-final.
Well, and it depends on if the comment is based in the ordinance, because that would happen plenty of times in the meeting. I have to, or the commissioner, I would have to like kind of guide it where it's like, you know, points taken, again, you can talk to the developer after the fact, but our decision can't be based on something that's outside of the ordinance. And just gonna stick by that. Now, if they make an argument that something in the ordinance isn't right, or that something that is listed in the ordinance has to be reviewed properly, then you're gonna have to think about it a little bit more. But generally it happens. So the board's doing their job.
I mean, at some point, yeah, you gotta stop.
I mean, it's
Stuff gets redundant.
Yes.
And, you know,
Yes.
I get that, but it's also, you know, they want their due process. And yeah, okay, you got it, but. Here we are, public hearing.
But it's,
I wanna be heard again. You know.
For 3 minutes.
we're the same. Objections.
Limited, it's up to the
And
chair.
3 or 4 or 5 different times.
Right, if the chair hears something 2 or 3 times, be like, hey, like, we've heard this comment enough, like, you have,
Right.
this is what you're here for, please don't come up, if you have something that heck new to that.
Right.
Feel free to come up.
Right. All right,
I mean, it's a valid question, but I did not know where some of this stuff should go. It's, yeah, what are you guys comfortable with? If you want more preliminary, I can shift to all preliminary, you can see what the final looks like. I guess there's pros and cons to both, but I mean, like the lighting plan, like. Those are pretty simple, I guess you can always make, so even if something's not quite right at final, just say to turn on a lighting plan. And there's one part of the lighting plan, slip candles aren't quite right, your condition of approval is you to fix. this like section of the lighting plan match what your like ordinance requires. And you can get the ability to review that small section of the lighting plan as a condition. Like it must be reviewed and approved by the code enforcement officer. But you don't need to have like every, I mean, everything should be close to perfect, but like something small like that, it just become a condition of approval.
So if somebody comes in and they're gonna do a subdivision, they're gonna bring in a sketch plan. We're gonna review it. Then they're gonna come in again with a preliminary plan review. And we'll discuss it. And we won't make any decisions and then.
Well, make a decision of whether it's quote unquote complete,
Yeah.
which it won't be.
If,
Based on your definition.
Right.
then we'll say it's either complete or not complete. And then I'll have to come.
Well, it won't be because there's a final plan which will have new stuff in it that's necessary that wasn't in. That's,
I think that, however we do this, we need to, bring the public in before we have the final plan review and make a decision. We should try to bring in, I don't know, it probably won't work. Because they don't come in early, only a few will come in early.
well, I think that would work if you required the whole application at the. You do the site plan. I mean, you do the sketch plan, and then you do the application, and then you have a preliminary hearing on the application. Not a preliminary application, a preliminary hearing. You decide what else, and then you have a public hearing. You can do the sketch plan too.
How, do the abutters get notified at completeness or application received or whatever, and then public hearing only, or
They should get notified every time the project comes to
even sketch plan?
the.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I put it in paper, but I don't notify.
others miss everything. Which is out of the screen, if you don't, then I'll have to change it.
Oh, we don't, I haven't.
Right.
At completeness, I did say, the town's received a subdivision from so-and-so, and as a butter within 1,000 feet, you're hereby notified. People call me out and say, why am I notified? I'm 1,000 feet away. I said, because the ordinance requires it. And then they get notified in the public hearing.
I mean, I can rewrite this to just have preliminary and where public butter services. But then you shouldn't have a public hearing.
But you can have multiple preliminary hearings, yes? Like,
Yeah.
You could have multiple, yeah, I feel like that.
But at some point, the developer wants to get it done.
Right.
Because also notification, I mean, it's 3 to 4 months before a subdivision gets typically approved
right,
because of the timing. Notification in newspapers and the butters notices and stuff.
but by the time you get to the final hearing, in theory, the planning board has gone through all of the ordinance requirements so that people can complain about the traffic and they can complain about potential effects on the aquifer, but the planning board is shepherded it so that there shouldn't be any questions regarding the ordinance, like you've checked all the boxes, we've got the setbacks, we've got the driveways,
I think for most part, there are some things again like that I have
Condition.
required and final because they might take longer to get.
right,
The board might not have seen the letter from MHCP, but they'd have something to say, and it's on the developer too, like there's some responsibility for them if they requested it so late.
Yeah.
They only found out about it, they didn't have time to turn it for preliminary. They're taking a risk, but sometimes it takes a little longer to get back to them, or like the same with the habitat thing, like there's plenty of ways to look up if that's on your property now.
Yeah.
But you need the letter as a required.
Well, like you said, we can't tell in what's spring.
Well,
Like,
the
part of the
beginning
full
of
stuff.
habitat map is always.
Yeah, no, I meant like,
You know,
what's
website stuff, yeah.
I feel like you know May.
And so like it's like, you wanna hold up something from getting for preliminary. For like a small piece of this that.
and that can be conditional, right, like you get,
Right,
right,
some of it could be, but, well, no, because the final, like, they should know where the proposal system.
yeah.
But, because you can only make conditions out of fine, shouldn't make, you don't make conditions at preliminary.
Right, okay.
Also, does, in the subdivision ordinance, are you guys considering,
like timing for submissions? Because we have nothing now. Somebody can actually bring something the night of the meeting.
No, you can't do that.
No, but I mean, that's what our ordinance doesn't have any deadline dates or submissions
Restriction.
or
Made the-
number of copies of the application.
I made the deadline date, the number of application copies.
Oh,
The
good.
deadline dates are what you put in your chart, I made the chart that you
Yeah,
get.
no, that's good though. Glad that that,
Because I know you make it based on the state law,
yeah.
so I just have to know saying, for example, it's the one
Yeah.
through that stuff. Yeah, that's all. So definitely gonna move to this approach. Based on this discussion.
One of the things I noticed is in the.
There are a lot of fine redundancy with 4404. Probably in subdivision ordinance, you know, with the stuff that's in this 4404 sections. Septic and stormwater, all that.
Once we get to performance standards, that's all based for the most part 44.
Yeah, but it's like, they're doing the same thing.
What are you saying?
You know, like, 384404, that's got like sewer, that's got,
Pollution, municipal water supply, sufficient water, traffic, erosion, sewage disposal, municipal solid waste.
that's already in. Being reviewed in subdivision ordinance, but then you have to do it again under the statute. It seems to be like,
So can we-
that's constant.
You don't have to do it. The statute is telling the town to put that in.
It says here, that when reviewing an application involving land, the planning board prior to granting approval shall find the following performance standards are met as described below. This 44 buffer strip. That was already in our ordinance, all that. And it's in the land use zoning ordinance, which we also have to look at. They're looking at it 3 times. Yeah, I know.
Well,
but
that
it's the
checklist,
thing,
this is-
that 4404, we had to look at that because the P. Andrew Hamilton told us.
Here, hold on, think you're overthinking part of this. So describe below, everything below is included in 4404, but the only reason I reference 4404 is in case the state changes. Something you can't keep up with your ordinance. I don't think they ever will, but they may add this type of requirement. But because what's in 4404 is nuclear, you're really.
Yeah.
What's below.
Yeah, I get that, but it's also in the land use zoning ordinance. But then also we had to go through 4404 for a specific subdivision application and the land use and the subdivision, it was the same stuff.
Yes.
And that's how Town
Three
Tremont is doing it.
Huh?
Town Tremont is doing it. That's
Same
they
thing.
have the same
Yes.
list. Then you got
Yeah.
4404 and they're both in.
So I was like, the subdivision and 44, we had to go through and do a finding of fact on every one of those, and it is the same stuff.
Well, that's after an appeal.
No.
Not yet, it's in court now, but,
So the.
no, but that Andy had said we have to do 4404.
But the checklist that we're gonna have, and you can combine all of
Is-
that.
3 times.
4404 is not, everything there is not in the ordinance.
And ours. land use
Not
zoning-
all of it, like spaghetti lots are in.
Oh, yeah, not spaghetti, no, spaghetti are, but the pollution is, sufficient water, erosion, traffic,
Right.
which is highway, sewage disposal,
Mhm.
buffers, financial capacity.
Penalties, that's not
But
it.
like, all that is in either the land use zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance and the statute.
I'll talk to your finger.
But no, seriously,
Yeah, I don't think.
But-
I would have to use it
So
twice.
when we have the mega checklist,
Yeah.
and you have sewage disposal, it could reference whatever ordinance, when you go into the checklist, it could reference,
Just put in parentheses all the spots that it's found.
yes. Yes.
Yeah, that would be fabulous.
And then you're only doing it once, you're finding those facts once, and it applies to the following. You know, whether all three or whatever.
I mean, some of these, right, they do have like. For erosion, there are no standards for erosion in this ordinance, standard is to look at the loose zone. That's where the standards actually are. Cause it's, I don't understand why you have to go to 4404, because 4404 doesn't have standards, just tells you. Erosion of the project will not cause a reasonable soil erosion.
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, we did. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know if I would.
Wow.
well, we,
I think we
we,
did it.
we can do it all, but we do it once.
Yeah.
Right, we do it.
No, I agree with that. Big in like the section.
Is that they'll do it once, because, yeah, we'll check all the boxes that are 4404, and then the extra ones that were already in the ordinance. And then if there's standards outside of this ordinance, it just tells you to go look there and say all three are. Communicating the same essentially. But yeah, but we're finding a fact page, will just.
Yeah, because the current subdivision says we have to also go to section 6 in the land use zoning ordinance. And then we have to do the state laws. Says it in our current ordinance. And that's why we had to go back and then go all through the buffer and everything, which is under 4404.
But then you had to do 44.
So,
Everybody's shaking their head because we've all been through this lengthy one, especially Heidi and I.
Okay, I think that makes more sense, but
I mean, I think it took 8 months for that review.
Been do it for 2 towns.
But it's also, we had a lot of people. A lot of people, so. I'm not happy about it.
well,
Yeah, we had to talk to him again. Man, we can get people to say them.
well, I think instead of saying 130, 44, 4404, maybe I just put a footnote that says like. I think the majority of, not just the majority of the. Follow the review standards described below. Are in compliance with 30, 44.
Yeah, that's good.
Something like that.
Yep.
It's a good move. It is. I've never had it happen before. Believe it, like now it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Where are we?
So when they like aesthetic, cultural, and natural values,
Mhm.
Isn't there a book that, if I memory serves me right,
I'm getting old, huh?
Hopefully it wasn't.
That talks of what is, where are the natural values and the cultural and aesthetics areas that are designated? I know when
Well, that's the
Maybe a
comprehensive plan.
where Acadia Mountain,
somebody was gonna do a subdivision there, and you guys parked in on the whole mountain. They had a big to-do came out
yeah.
about that. And they're having this be a natural, whatever. It was, and I think there's a book. Of places that are designated as.
Well, that's where you get the letters from the state, from, they should, both those departments. Required letters from the point that sort of thing out.
Wasn't that resolved by a large money buying?
Yes, is there like a reference you could put here that where somebody signed the department,
I mean, I do tell them what the department is doing the
yeah.
requirements.
Houses.
Yeah. I don't know if that would be, I believe there probably wasn't doing, now that the maps are
Yeah.
online now. For these, they have a tax line value.
Yeah, I go,
areas, yeah. I'm about historic. That top plan would be a good spot to set them to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're discussing that.
it probably won't be done.
Well, I mean, it might not be, the state may find stuff.
Yeah,
archaeological sites that are.
Do you know how often they update their maps? The archaeological site?
Oh, the archaeological one, yeah,
I think the
Oh.
one I have is either 17 or 19.
yeah, it's not very rare, we could believe it's
Not-
yeah, no money. They have to get permission from landowner. So,
Right.
it's all right.
Can I flag a little typo
Sure.
on page 15? Easements, 4.3.22, you talk about sewerage instead of sewage. I had a couple other questions if you want. I'm jumping out of order, but people.
I mean, like, there's a lot of repetition between the requirements for
Right.
the structure.
The solar energy systems access to direct sunlight. Why are we making that discretionary? Doesn't that allow for arbitrary?
It's in state law, I think pretty sure it's down, we bases it from what was in the ordinance already, but this is a provision. This is the board may, the board has the ability to decide if they need to execute on this, particular requirement or not.
17%, 4.3%. So we're basically leaving it up to the determination of the board, or would we want to put that in an ordinance, what the policy is?
I would,
Is there,
it's, I mean, like, if there may be a solar project that was unnecessary, there's just extra work be done.
well, if you want, I so much a solar project, it's like if people want to put solar on the roofs, right? If you wanna make a policy that you want to encourage people to have access, the ability to put solar. on. I mean, I don't know if we do, but. I'm not quite sure. In other words, I just want to make sure that it's not just like, well, you've got a board, you have 3 people on it who want to put solar panels everywhere, therefore you're gonna make a ruling, whereas you might have a different board. That has a different opinion and they don't. Require, I would like to.
This isn't meant to apply, I should say, if it doesn't read clearly, I can see if I want to change the language, or not, but.
It's meant for, so if there's a existing solar energy system or a solar energy system is part of a subdivision, like someone's building houses, but they also have part of the lot being used for solar. It's a very niche thing where you're saying that the buildings and setbacks have to be in such a way that they won't block the sun from hitting the solar panels. That the solar panels will still work.
Alright, so that's pretty limited.
Yeah. It's not affecting if someone wants to put,
And the height restrictions that exist in the zone might stop somebody from putting solar on top of their house, so that's not what this provision. Stop.
In the waivers section of 18. I like the idea of being able to do some waivers. I mean, I think about the folks whose site visit we did. Because they want to build their own house on. Lot, then they've built another house on. Recently, so they've got to do a whole subdivision. Process for. Be able to build their home on this lot, okay? So I think of that as an example of where we might consider. And I want to know if other people, like, what other examples or situations in which we might authorize waivers of certain provisions of application process? Would we consider something like that?
You can't waive.
Well,
You have a subdivision for dwelling units within a 5-year period, it's free.
No, you say there's specific provisions. The waiver is not for the entire review process, it's for specific provisions within the review process.
You,
like
you can,
the way you've written 4.6, that's what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
The board makes certain findings of fact that there were special circumstances of a particular tract or structure proposed to be subdivided. The application is simple and minor in nature, may waive portions of the subdivision requirements.
So like you probably wouldn't require traffic.
Right, right. Well, we have the ability to do that now. Waive.
Well, yeah, it's the section 6 is waivers in your ordinance.
I think I made it slightly broader than what's currently written. I can. But don't think the language about minor natures in there, because I think I did that on purpose. In there.
It's not a 6,
Or-
section 6.
like you guys waived road standards.
Oh,
That required, you know, 50 foot, you know, whatever, but.
Yes.
Yeah, but they gotta be on the plan, the waivers.
So I think I did add the minor nature language. Doesn't look like that's in the current waiver. And it's rephrased. And it's short. All extra language that currently exists about road design standards. It essentially says you can waive them over approve certain things. I can put that language back in, but there's already a line about ensuring public health and safety. You're granting the waiver, so I thought it was kind of redundant.
See what plays out, what you're finding the fact for a waiver has. That is, so I guess one of kind of the confusing section. Or maybe not confusing, but just burdensome is 4.7 performance guarantees. I don't know how often this board asks for performance guarantees or what the practice of the town is in requesting them. I've never really requested them. There was probably only like 2 projects I would have.
The one that I know. Oh, no, to
So it's like,
cell towers and then. Or.
so it's like, yeah, larger projects, I know like solar essentially requires them with state law, you don't call it performance guarantees, but
That goes on, so,
just in practice of the town requesting.
and aren't there, if you were gonna. Performance guarantees, as I understood it, were to make sure that if the town had to go out on a limb for infrastructure. Or something like that, that this would cover,
Goes in an escrow account.
right,
Or
And if the project subdivided doesn't finish.
right, you know, left, the town is. not gonna do it.
It's only for projects that, for subdivisions, I should say, that have public utilities.
Right, and I don't know enough, but aren't there some types of performance guarantees that are, that you want to avoid that are not enough of a guarantee?
that I don't. I've just listed the ones that are pretty common, like I looked at other ordinances.
Yeah, I think there's a.
I mean, because yeah, it depends on the type of project, like the board uses what kind of performance guarantee there is.
But the board needs to have an understanding of what they're choosing. That's like,
Right, so that's why I did include descriptions of each. I mean, I'm not a finance person, so my understanding of them is probably fairly limited.
less than mine.
Probably less than, sure.
No, I mean, more, less limited than mine.
I would say conditional agreement is probably the weakest of them, where an escrow account is the best way to go.
Right.
Is this also where
Money could go in an escrow, so work and hire a professional.
No, that's separate. That was discussed in those stuff we went over last time. So if they did both, you'd want two separate accounts for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone confused?
Yeah.
Nope. Great. Yeah, I mean, like, if there's anything that it's missing from like the performance standards or. Yeah, I'm moving a lot of the bigger stuff to go in there. So like next time, but. There's information that I have that's being optional for the board to request, but you think they should request it for every project? No. But that's it. All I wrote.
Oh.
We got 2 minutes left.
Thank you.
Hard one there.
There matters to be discussed at this evening's meeting.
Here. Motion to adjourn? I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
No.
Aye.